The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd heard variations of them my entire life. Standing in our cramped kitchen, holding my acceptance letter from the local community college, I watched my mother's face contort into that familiar expression of disdain. Community college? Mom sneered, not even looking up from where she was arranging yet another one of my sister Rebecca's academic awards on the mantelpiece. You'll never be as good as your sister. Rebecca got into Harvard at 17. You're 20, and this is the best you can do? I felt the familiar sting of tears threatening to spill, but I blinked them back. At 20 years old, I should have been immune to her cutting words by now, but they still carved into me like a rusty knife. Rebecca, my younger sister by 3 years, had always been the golden child, valedictorian, National Merit Scholar, early admission to Harvard with a full scholarship. Meanwhile, I had struggled through high school with undiagnosed dyslexia, working twice as hard for half the recognition. I'm proud of this, Mom, I said quietly, clutching the letter. I worked really hard to get my GED after dropping out, and now I'm finally ready for college. She laughed, a cold, bitter sound that made my stomach clench. Proud? Mia, sweetheart, pride is for achievements. This is just participation. She waved dismissively at my letter. Rebecca called yesterday. She's being fast-tracked for early acceptance to Harvard Medical School. Now that's something to be proud of. I stood there for a moment longer, watching her dust Rebecca's trophies with reverent care while my acceptance letter, my first real academic achievement, felt worthless in my hands. This was nothing new. For 20 years, I'd lived in Rebecca's shadow, watching my mother beam with pride at every honor roll certificate, every science fair victory, every academic accolade that came so easily to my brilliant little sister. What my mother didn't know, what she'd never bothered to discover, was that those years of struggle had taught me something Rebecca had never learned: resilience. While Rebecca glided through life on natural intelligence and constant praise, I'd learned to work for everything, to research obsessively, to find creative solutions when the obvious path was blocked. That night, I sat in my tiny bedroom and made a decision that would change everything. If my mother wanted to compare us so badly, I'd give her a real comparison to make. I started my research that very evening. Rebecca's perfect academic record, her scholarship details, her social media presence. I studied it all with the methodical patience I'd developed through years of compensating for my learning differences. What I discovered was enlightening. My sister, for all her natural brilliance, had taken the traditional path. She'd followed the prescribed route of AP classes, standardized tests, and conventional achievement. She was undoubtedly smart, but she'd never had to think outside the box or fight for anything in her life. I, on the other hand, had learned to be scrappy. My community college experience was different from the beginning. Instead of just attending classes, I threw myself into every opportunity available. I joined the debate team, started a tutoring program for students with learning differences, and began writing for the school newspaper. When I discovered that our journalism program was underfunded and outdated, I didn't just complain. I researched grant opportunities and wrote proposals. 3 months into my first semester, I'd secured a $50,000 grant to modernize our journalism lab. The story was picked up by the local newspaper, then a regional one. Suddenly, people were calling me an innovative student leader and advocate for educational equity. But I was just getting started. While Rebecca continued her predictable march through Harvard's pre-med program, I was building something bigger. I used my platform from the grant success to start a nonprofit organization focused on educational resources for students with learning differences. I called it Different Paths, and within 6 months, we'd raised over $200,000 and were operating in 3 states. My mother, of course, barely noticed. When I mentioned the nonprofit at Sunday dinner, she nodded absently and immediately changed the subject to Rebecca's latest organic chemistry grade. Rebecca got a 98 on her midterm, Mom announced proudly. Her professor said it was the highest score in the class. That's great, I said, then added, Different Paths got featured in Education Week magazine this month. We're being recognized as one of the top 10 innovative programs for learning differences in the country. Mom's fork paused halfway to her mouth. That's nice, dear. But her eyes were already back on her phone, probably checking for a text from Rebecca. The injustice of it burned in my chest, but I channeled that fire into fuel. I doubled down on my efforts, working 18-hour days between classes, the nonprofit, and my job at the campus bookstore. I was exhausted, but I was also building something real, something that mattered. By the end of my first year at community college, I had accomplished more than I'd ever dreamed possible. Different Paths was operating in 7 states. I'd been invited to speak at educational conferences, and I'd been accepted into a competitive transfer program at the state university with a full scholarship. More importantly, we'd helped over 3,000 students with learning differences succeed academically. But none of it seemed to register with my mother. She still introduced me as my daughter who's at community college, while Rebecca was my daughter at Harvard. The comparison was always implicit but crushing. The breaking point came during Rebecca's winter break. She came home full of stories about her prestigious internship opportunity at Massachusetts General Hospital, her perfect grades, and her acceptance into an honor society. Mom hung on every word, asking detailed questions and taking photos to post on social media. When dinner conversation finally shifted to me, it was with barely concealed disinterest. "How's your little club going, Mia?" Mom asked, already starting to clear the dishes. "It's not a club, Mom. It's a nonprofit organization. We just received our 501c3 status, and we're expanding into Canada next month." Rebecca looked up from her phone with mild curiosity. "That's actually pretty cool. What exactly do you do?" Before I could answer, Mom waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, it's some tutoring thing for kids who can't keep up in school. Nothing like what Rebecca's doing. She's going to save lives." The familiar hurt flared in my chest, but this time it was accompanied by something else, a cold, calculating anger. I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and saw someone so blinded by conventional success that she couldn't recognize real impact when it was sitting at her own dinner table. "You're right, Mom," I said quietly. "What Rebecca's doing is very traditional, very predictable." Rebecca frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" I shrugged, keeping my voice level. "Just that anyone with your grades and test scores could follow the same path. Pre-med at Harvard, internship at Mass General, medical school. It's the standard playbook for smart kids with supportive families." "There's nothing wrong with following a proven path to success," Mom interjected sharply. "Of course not," I agreed. "But building something from nothing? Identifying a need that everyone else overlooked and creating a solution that helps thousands of people? That's different. That requires a different kind of intelligence." The words hung in the air like smoke. Rebecca looked uncomfortable, and Mom's face was flushing red. "Are you implying that what Rebecca's doing isn't impressive?" Mom's voice had gone dangerously quiet. "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating that what I'm doing is creating real, measurable change in the world right now, while Rebecca is still preparing to maybe create change someday in the future." It was a direct hit, and I knew it. Rebecca's face went pale, and Mom stood up so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. "How dare you diminish your sister's achievements? Rebecca is going to be a doctor. And I'm already helping thousands of people succeed in school when everyone else gave up on them," I replied calmly, "including you." The silence that followed was deafening. I had finally said it, the truth that had been festering between us for years. Mom had given up on me the moment my grades didn't match Rebecca's, the moment I struggled where my sister excelled. "I think you should go to your room," Mom said, her voice shaking with rage. I think I should move out, I replied, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. I'm 21 years old, I'm running a successful nonprofit, and I have a full scholarship to the state university. I don't need to live somewhere where my achievements are treated like consolation prizes. And that's exactly what I did. Within 2 weeks, I had moved into a small apartment near campus, using the salary I'd started paying myself from different paths to cover expenses. The distance from my family gave me perspective and energy I hadn't realized I was missing. Without the constant emotional drain of seeking my mother's approval, I threw myself even deeper into my work. Different paths exploded in growth. We developed innovative online learning tools, created mentorship programs, and partnered with major universities to improve support for students with learning differences. The recognition came quickly. I was invited to speak at national conferences, featured in major publications, and selected for Forbes's 30 Under 30 list in education. The nonprofit grew from a small operation to a nationally recognized organization with a multi-million-dollar budget and offices in 12 states. Meanwhile, my family's reaction was complicated. Dad called regularly, proud but also clearly trying to play peacekeeper. Rebecca and I maintained a cautious relationship. She was genuinely impressed by what I'd built, but there was also an uncomfortable undercurrent of competition that had never existed before. And Mom? She went through what I can only describe as the 5 stages of grief. First was denial. For months, she acted as if my success was temporary, a fluke that would eventually fade. She continued to focus exclusively on Rebecca's achievements, mentioning my work only in passing and always with subtle, undermining comments. Then came anger. When a major newspaper ran a feature article about different paths and my story of overcoming learning differences, Mom called me furious. How dare I air our family's private business? How dare I make her look like an unsupportive parent? You're making me look terrible, she said during one particularly heated phone call. People are going to think I don't support you. Don't you think that's between you and your conscience? I replied. Bargaining came next. Suddenly, Mom wanted to be involved in different paths. She offered to help with fundraising events, suggested we add Rebecca to the board, tried to insert herself into my success story. When I politely declined, explaining that the organization needed to maintain its independence and authentic voice, she was hurt and confused. Depression followed. According to Dad, Mom spent weeks obsessing over old photo albums, trying to find evidence of times she'd supported my education. She called my elementary school teachers, asking them if they remembered me struggling. She seemed genuinely tormented by the possibility that she'd failed me as a parent. But it was the final stage, acceptance, that brought the most dramatic change. It happened 2 years after I'd moved out, during a moment I'll never forget. Different Paths had just won a major national award, and the ceremony was being broadcast live on C-SPAN. I was giving my acceptance speech, talking about the importance of recognizing different types of intelligence and supporting students who learn differently, when I noticed a familiar figure in the audience. My mother was crying. Not the careful, photogenic tears she shed at Rebecca's graduation, but real, messy sobs that shook her whole body. Dad was holding her hand, and even Rebecca, now in her 2nd year of medical school, looked emotional. After the ceremony, they came backstage to find me. Mia, Mom said, her voice breaking. I need to apologize. It was the first time in my life I'd heard her say those words to me. I've been watching your speech and reading about your work, and She took a shaky breath. I failed you. I was so focused on traditional success, on grades and test scores and prestigious schools, that I couldn't see what you were actually capable of. I stood there, holding my award, watching my mother finally see me, really see me for the first time in my life. You built something incredible, she continued. You identified a problem that I didn't even know existed and created a solution that's helping thousands of kids. You turned your struggle into your strength, and I was too blind to recognize it. The conversation that followed was long overdue. We talked about my childhood struggles, her fears about my future, the pressure she'd felt to push me toward conventional success. She admitted that she'd been so afraid I would fail that she couldn't celebrate when I succeeded differently than she'd expected. When you were struggling in school, I thought I was protecting you by managing your expectations, she said. I thought if I could just get you to follow Rebecca's path, you'd be safe. I never considered that you might find a better path. Your own path. It wasn't a magical reconciliation where all past hurts disappeared instantly. Trust takes time to rebuild, and some wounds leave permanent scars. But it was a beginning. The real resolution came 6 months later, when Different Paths hosted its first annual gala. It was a major event, 500 guests, major donors, politicians, and education leaders from around the country. Rebecca flew in from medical school, Dad wore his best suit, and Mom spent weeks planning what she would wear. But the moment that mattered most happened during my opening remarks. 5 years ago, I told the audience, my mother told me I would never be as good as my sister. She was absolutely right. I would never be as good as Rebecca. I would be something different. I would be exactly who I was meant to be. I found my mother's face in the audience. She was crying again, but this time she was also smiling. My mother taught me something valuable that night, even though she didn't intend to. She taught me that comparison is the thief of joy, but it's also the birthplace of innovation. When you can't follow someone else's path, you have to create your own. And sometimes, the path you create ends up being exactly where the world needed you to go. The applause was thunderous, but all I could see was my family, all 3 of them, standing and clapping with genuine pride. After the event, as we were cleaning up, Mom approached me with something in her hand. I have something for you, she said, holding out a small wrapped box. Inside was a simple silver necklace with a pendant that read, Different Path. I had it made, she said quietly, to remind us both that different doesn't mean less than. It just means different. And in your case, different means extraordinary. I put the necklace on and wore it every day after that. Not because I needed the reminder, but because it represented something I'd fought for my entire life. My mother's recognition that I was enough, exactly as I was. Today, Different Paths serves over 50,000 students across the United States and Canada. Rebecca is now Dr. Rebecca Chen, a pediatric resident at Johns Hopkins, and we're actually collaborating on a program to identify learning differences in young children before they start school. She's brilliant at the medical side, and I handle the educational intervention piece. My mother volunteers at our local Different Paths office 3 days a week, working with parents who are struggling to understand their children's learning differences. She tells them her story, how she almost missed seeing her daughter's potential because she was looking for the wrong kind of success. I spent so many years trying to fix what I thought was broken in Mia, she tells them. I never realized that what I saw as weakness was actually her superpower. She learned to see problems differently, to find creative solutions, to persist when others gave up. Those skills you develop when you struggle, they're exactly what the world needs. It's ironic, really. I spent 20 years trying to prove to my mother that I was as good as Rebecca. In the end, I proved something much more valuable. I proved that I didn't need to be as good as anyone else. I just needed to be the best version of myself. The revenge I thought I wanted, proving my mother wrong, showing her she'd underestimated me, turned out to be hollow compared to the real victory. Helping her understand that love doesn't require comparison and that every child deserves to be seen for who they are, not who others think they should be. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving someone wrong. Sometimes it's proving them right in a way they never expected, and then showing them a better way forward. My mother was right. I would never be as good as my sister. I would be something infinitely more valuable. I would be myself.